global agenda. Though much has been transmuted since that era, many of its guiding tenets remain relevant. Some should be considered anew. America's foreign policy should proceed from strategic blueprints, rather than reactions to discrete events. Statesmen must make courageous decisions with imperfect, often ambiguous information. In negotiations, America's point of departure should be a clear exposition of its needs and an understanding of its interlocutor's history, culture, and goals. Above all, what has not changed is the indispensability of American leadership. Its exercise compels us to integrate our interests and values, as I wrote in my first book, A World Restored, more than half a century ago, to attempt to reconcile what is considered just with what is considered possible. Forward. This book is the written version of Henry Kissinger's one and only oral history, and it came about more or less by accident. Several years ago, starting in 2014, K.T. McFarland and I agreed to steer a series of foreign policy panels for the Nixon Legacy Forums, a joint enterprise sponsored by the Richard Nixon Foundation and the National Archives and Records Administration. They were the brainchild of Nixon administration alumnus Jeff Shepard, who had organized some 36 panel discussions with former White House officials to reflect on the thinking and processes behind the various domestic and foreign policy initiatives of the Nixon administration, collective oral histories, if you will. Many of the panelists had already done individual oral histories, but had not appeared together in a group format. The idea was that the whole would be greater than the sum of the parts, that the panelists would build off each other's recollections to create a more complete picture. The sessions were recorded, shown on C-SPAN's American History TV channel, and the videotapes made available through the Nixon Foundation. KT and I ran 4 foreign policy panels from 2014 to 2015. The Revitalization of the National Security Council, the Opening to China, Soviet Détente and the SALT negotiations, and Vietnam and the Paris Peace Accords. These, together with an earlier panel on the Middle East, covered the major foreign policy initiatives of the Nixon-Kissinger collaboration. I wrote the outlines for each discussion, which were circulated to the panelists in advance to refresh their recollections. KT led the discussions, drawing staff members out to describe their own experiences and contributions. The original plan was to cap off this series with a 1-hour video interview with Dr. Kissinger for his reflections on these key initiatives. KT and I sat down with Dr. Kissinger in his office in December 2015 for the session. His memory was phenomenal, especially since he is in his 90s, and we were asking him to recall events that occurred half a lifetime before. As the hour drew to a close, we realized we had barely scratched the surface. So we persuaded Dr. Kissinger to do a second interview, and a third, and so on. He recounted strategic objectives and major milestones, punctuated throughout with personal anecdotes. The interviews became more of a conversation among old friends and colleagues, with the stories Dr. Kissinger told seeming as fresh as if they had happened the day before. Early in our exchanges, Dr. Kissinger confided that he had never done an oral history, which surprised us, since he had given hundreds of interviews over the decades, and he is clearly one of the most outstanding national security figures of the post-war era. So we teased out our series of exchanges to expand beyond Kissinger's time in government to include his reflections on diplomacy, on grand strategy, and, ultimately, on leadership. In all, we conducted 6 video interviews with Dr. Kissinger over the course of a year, finishing in December 2016. We both realized the historic significance of our project, an extensive multi-part interview with Kissinger in his own words, spontaneously from memory and from his own perspective.